Splatana Stamper is an extremely appealing weapon to pick up. Not only is it really fun and a brand new weapon in this game, but it's consistently been top 5 if not top 10 for pretty much the entire game's lifespan so far. While there's a lot to go over today, I'm going to try to do my best to break down how to play this weapon, covering all the basics for beginners and getting into a bit of the more advanced stuff you'll be able to learn if you're trying to pick up the weapon. This is my Splatana Stamper guide for Splatoon 3. Subscribe if you enjoy and consider becoming a member to support the channel if you like larger projects like this, and let's get started. First off, the weapon basics. This Splatana Stamper has two different slashes, the uncharged and charged slash, which I'll be calling horizontal and vertical slash from here on out, just to make it a bit easier. The horizontal slash is your default attack, which doesn't use too much ink and does a solid 35 damage. It's a mid-range attack with a relatively wide hitbox, but not a tall one. It paints okay and has a bit of end lag, but not too much of one. This is basically just your standard mid-range attack, the main weakness here being its kill time if you're only using the horizontal slash is outdone by pretty much anything else in this weapon's range value. However, that's fine since it's made to work with its other attacks, which I'll get to in a bit. Up close, the sword itself has the ability to do an additional 20 damage, which means sometimes you can only hit the 20 damage, which has almost no use cases, and you can sometimes hit both attacks for 55 damage, which again, given that the vertical slash exists, doesn't really have a lot of use cases, but it's there for some niche stuff I'll get to later. The vertical slash is extremely ink hungry. You don't get a lot of these on a full ink tank, and you have to be very careful when you use them. However, you get a lot more power out of it. The beam does 70 damage, and its range actually matches some backline weapons in the game, like Heavy Splatling or Jet Squelcher. And despite being the charged attack version, it has much less end lag than horizontal slash. Its main downside is that it both has a charge time and slow shot velocity, meaning that opponents will have a lot of time to be able to react and move out of the way of the attack. The up-close variation for this one is a lot more useful though, as this is just straight up a one-shot. It is worth noting that the one-shot hitbox and the beam itself are actually two separate attacks though. If you attack the big dummies, this is why you get 210 damage. The beam itself comes out slightly later, so the one-shot is slightly faster. And it's also possible to hit both of these, though incredibly situational. The vertical slash also has the ability to be combined with a dash, which gives you a small burst of movement before the attack comes out, allowing you to have a little bit more movement options, and after this dash you're able to flick your aim in pretty much any direction. This makes it great as a movement option, giving you a bit more range when chasing people down, or especially rounding any form of corner without exposing yourself too early. This weapon thrives off of using many of these different tools together. But before we get to that, it's important to talk about the weapon kits and the weaknesses that swords have. The vanilla Splatana Stamper comes with Burst Bomb and Zipcaster, while the Nouveau kit comes with Toxic Mist and Crab Tank, both of them being 210p. Before I get into the specific kits, I want to talk about the three main flaws of this weapon, and I promise it'll make sense why these are in the same section. Number 1, line of sight. You have no way of hitting people around any kind of angle or corner, which means it's really important that you can actually see the people you're hitting. Due to the large size of the vertical and horizontal slashes, this also means that cover is especially good against your weapon. If you've ever played it on tower control and seen someone hiding behind the tower pole to cut off your slashes, this is what I'm talking about. Number 2, paint. Now, Splatana Stamper does get a lot of paint stat, like total at the end of the game, you're going to have a good amount of them, but Splatana Stamper is not the weapon you pick to turn the map your color. For example, let's say you push past the right side of Scorch Gorge and you get into the enemy snipe. A shooter will take it over very quickly, you will paint 3 lines that aren't as useful. Even compared to other line painting weapons like Pencil, that weapon gets 5 of them and has more range than you do. On top of that, it kind of clashes with the role you want to do since you're a Slayer. Basically, your paint is good at farming a frequent amount of specials and just getting paint totals in general while everything is being contested because you have distance paint. It's not actually good at creating space your team can move in easily like other support weapons. Number 3, downtime. Your weapon uses a lot of ink, so you're spending a lot of time in the match recovering it back. It's pretty self-explanatory, but any ink-hungry weapon has this weakness, and it especially means that it's difficult to use your sub-weapons alongside your main weapon without making this even more of a problem. So why am I talking about this? Because while both kits seem really good on paper, one of these kits actually makes up for all 3 of these issues, and one of them doesn't, on top of slowing you down. This is why the vanilla Stamper is by far the most picked one at top level play. There are still, however, uses for Neo Sword's kit. I mean, it's a sword with a crab, so of course there are, and it's especially strong on Rainmaker, where Toxic Mist and Crab Tank are very valuable for slowing down the Rainmaker, preventing it from moving forward, or doing high damage to the Rainmaker shield itself. But for the most part, there will be a bit more of an emphasis on the vanilla kit in this video, and this is why. The main difficulty from Neo Sword, though, comes from the fact that it doesn't make up for these weaknesses with the kit it has, and so you have to play around them a bit more in order to get value from its unique kit. Next up, let's touch on two topics: combos and object damage. The main way Stamper fights is combining multiple of its attacks together. Obviously, some things are by itself, like its dash/one-shot, but most things are combos together. I'm gonna speed run through these because they're pretty simple, but it's worth keeping them all in mind. The bread and butter combo of this weapon is charge slash into horizontal slash. By adding burst bombs to the equation, you get way more of these combos. Charge slash into burst bomb medium hit, horizontal slash medium hit burst bomb, and another horizontal slash in any order. Up close horizontal slash and a burst bomb direct. And on top of that, you can add burst bombs as a movement tool, of course, into any of this. Zipcaster also does damage very similarly to burst bomb, being able to do over 35 damage, meaning any combo number that uses the 35 number that burst bomb applies to also works for Zip. And on top of that, Zip passing through someone does 60 damage, which also has the same combo capabilities of burst bomb's direct hit. Crab Sword, on the other hand, doesn't have any of this because it has mist, which does slow people down, which is especially useful for the vertical slash, but given that it uses 60% of your ink tank, is difficult to combo with. The only real thing you have here is either 2 horizontal slash and 1 charge slash, immediately popping Crab and using your AoE fire for a 30 damage hit. Now let's get on to object damage. Splatana Stamper is some of the highest object damage in the game. I'm not going to talk about it with Object Shredder because realistically you don't need it and stealth is very good, and I'll talk about them more when we get to gear. So I'm going to go over the damage numbers you need to break all 4 main HP specials, both up close at a distance. Crab Tank. This one is 2 charge slashes if you're up close. Keep in mind you can also hit the Crab Rider pretty easily if they're standing and fighting you, and at a distance is 2 charge slashes and 2 horizontal slashes. Booyah Bomb is 3 charge slashes at a distance plus 1 horizontal slash to get the kill afterward, and up close is 2 charge slashes with, again, another horizontal to get the kill. Wave Breaker is a charge slash and horizontal slash at a distance, and just the charge slash if you're up close. This special is really easy to counter. Against Big Bubbler, rather than being up close to it, you're actually better at shredding it from a distance. This is because your charge slash can hit both the weak point and the bubble itself, which stacks a lot of damage. This requires 4 charge slashes to break, which is pretty insane given just how much HP Big Bubbler has. It goes without saying, but all of these are high priority targets for you to focus down. So next up, I want to talk about playstyle and a little bit of extra Zipcaster tips. Stamper is a frontline aggressive weapon. Even the Nuvo kit that does have more supportive tendencies is played very aggressively optimally. It's primarily a mid-range slayer, which means most of the time you are playing for damage combos, such as just the simple charge slash horizontal slash at a distance and trying to maintain that distance. However, Stamper is unique in the fact that it still has solid up-close options between its one-shot, dash slashes, and ledge peeking, which means, in my opinion, the best Stampers are the ones who are really good at playing mid-range, then punishing you up close when they're able to bait opponents in. It should be a difficult guessing game for the opponent when you're going to close the gap. That'll force them to back off and respect you more, which will in turn give you more space to work with. Keep in mind when picking targets that cover is especially effective against your weapon with the wide hitboxes, allowing things to block your attacks more easily, especially small bits of cover like the tower pole that I mentioned earlier. Against more mobile opponents, I would recommend sticking with horizontal slash a bit more than the charge slash, and using it as a way to get more reliable damage. This can especially be good against weapons that have solid horizontal movement options like dualies. Generally, the faster a weapon is, the harder it's going to be to hit charge slashes, and the more you're going to want to depend on horizontal. Slower weapons, however, like Range Blaster, Dynamo, or some of the backline weapons, can be more effectively punished by charge slashes, which can lead to easy follow-ups. When you push up to new positions, generally you want to be looking for ledges that you can play under whenever possible. Stamper's charge slash under ledge is especially difficult to deal with. One of the best positions for this example here will be Museum on the right side, where you can poke pretty much the entirety of Spinner, and from that high ground it's nearly impossible for weapons to hit you, meaning you can poke people out of position pretty effectively until you're eventually able to move forward. Being under the ledge also means if opponents do challenge you, they're going to get very up close to you where you're going to be able to charge slash effectively, or back up and trap them in a corner where it'll be easier to hit your own combos. Vanilla Sword will have a bit easier of a time in these fighting situations since it does have access to Burst Bomb. However, I would be very careful not to overuse it. Since the ink consumption of the main weapon and sub have been nerfed so much, you basically only get one of these in most of your fights, and so accidentally whiffing it isn't great. This means oftentimes it might be better to use in the middle of your combos instead of at the beginning. If you're going to go for burst at the start, such as Burst Bomb into a charge slash for the extra kill range, keep in mind that you're not going to have that later when you actually engage the opponent. So this can be more useful useful if you're poking people and are not able to follow up on it, rather than are trying to close the gap on someone. Lastly, before we get to the specific matchups, let's talk about Zipcaster. Zipcaster is something that should be used as a life extension a lot. Don't worry too much about where your recall is. Obviously, if you can put it in a little bit of cover, that's great, but don't spend a few seconds going all the way into a corner to leave your zip recall, and then whenever you recall, you have to spend a few seconds getting into the fight. This special is fast, and it's meant to keep the pace of this weapon and its kit up, so having a lot of extra downtime from this recall positioning is a problem. When you're mid-caster, obviously there'll be a few different targets in mind, and generally some slower weapons will be easier to target. But you do want to be careful not to tunnel one too easily or go for a kill too much. I see a lot of Stampers zip casting and staying relatively close to the ground or trying to chase this one backline they really want to take out, and that can leave you very predictable, easier to punish by other weapons, and potentially make it so the backline weapon can just run around and trade your value out. Sometimes that's worth it, but a lot of times it isn't. Being able to mix up going higher up so you get better vantage points as well as diving multiple different targets can mean that more of the enemy team is going to be looking in your direction. This creates openings for the other team where they can find more 3v2s or 2v1s, for example, especially if you're in a team setting where you can call that out. Finally, when in the caster itself, be especially careful not to zip to the floor unless if you're really sure you're going to be safe there. It's incredibly laggy. This means a lot of times it's better to do damage by trying to hit a wall near someone rather than trying to zip directly on top of them, and taking fights based off who you manage to hit and separate from opponents. Finally, some small crab advice for the Nubo kit. It's not as important as Zipcaster is here, but it's worth noting. Crab does better in high line of sight areas where you can't get surrounded as easily. Think common backline positions, that's often where you want to use it. In addition to that, you can use the ball mode to tank for a little bit, which is good for keeping you alive if you get a few kills. Though the main thing to keep in mind with Crab is, unlike something like Dooley for example, you don't really have a fast option if it gets broken. So be careful to move toward teammates if people are challenging you up close. Like with Brella, I did decide to make a matchup chart for this, though I think it's a bit less important here. What's worth noting is you could beat most weapons in the game. Between your 2 charge slashes and high object damage, you can deal with most things fairly well. There's a few things I would keep in mind. 1. Sharking weapons like rollers, or sometimes Tri-Slosher. Since you can't paint super effectively, when contesting the map that's highly controlled by other people, it can be very difficult to find where rollers are hiding, and you may need to be dependent on other people to get control of this kind of space. Area of effect weapons with good range, such as Sloshers, Machine, or especially Range Blaster, can be really good at dealing with your ledge peeking, since these weapons can effectively fight you and maintain their distance. This can be a counter to that playstyle, and one where you'll need to be a bit more careful on where you ledge camp and keeping those weapons in mind. I think Range is an especially good matchup into it, since it also has a one-shot that can punish you if you try to go up close. Fighting weapons with Splash Wall, like the 52, Gluga, 96, and especially Squeezer are all very good into this weapon. While Stamper does have solid object damage, taking down wall takes quite a bit of time, especially given the ink efficiency that you have. So these weapons, especially those with a bit more range, are very reliable at taking space against you. Next, extremely mobile weapons. There aren't too many of these, but the Reflux and Heavy Edit Spotling come to mind, where their strafing speed is so fast that up-close one-shots and charge slashes are actually very difficult to hit against them. This is one where you're going to rely on horizontal slashes, which might be too slow to kill these 2 weapons in particular if they're in their effective range. Still matchups you can absolutely take, but something to keep in mind. Finally is chargers. As you can probably guess, most chargers are pretty good against this weapon. Not only can they snipe Zipcasters pretty easily and reliably, but Bamboo and Snipe Raider also has a lot of mobility to play at a distance and fight you, on top of course, all of these weapons having a good range advantage. I would say that no matchup here is really that bad, but the ones I would be most careful about would be Elir and Squeezer. Squeezer has ridiculous mobility, especially with run speed up, meaning it can dodge your charge slash fairly effectively, even up close, has a fast kill time, a wall to be able to block and tank shots, and on top of all of that has Panic Zuka, which can still be really good against you and kill through your Zipcaster armor. And while E-Leader isn't as bad, I think it's one of the best counters to Zipcaster in the game, since it can hit you even if you're diving other targets and is very reliable at getting that kill, as well as will stay far away and patrol any open sightlines you want to pressure. Again, most of these matchups are winnable, but it's important to keep these things in mind. Play near bomb weapons if you're fighting wall. Have painting weapons nearby if you want to challenge a roller. Be careful ledge peeking against something like a blaster or a slosher. There are still enough things against you to where you do need to keep in mind how to play against these specific matchups, even some of the ones you win. Before we get to gear, let's talk a little bit about some advanced info for the weapon. First off, short hops. The charge slash time for this weapon and your mobility works way better if you do short hops than full hops, which means lightly pressing the B button instead of holding it down. Basically, as soon as you charge slash, you're already hitting the floor again and are able to move immediately, versus if you jump, there's a bit of a delay where you're more punished. punishable, so you pretty much always want to be using short jumps. When painting with the weapon, especially the Nouveau sword, it's important to keep in mind that the charge slashes use a lot more ink. Horizontal slash also paints slightly better than the vertical since it's nerfed, which means sometimes if you're trying to stall a zone or paint for crap for instance, it's better to use horizontal. Charge slash I think is a really nice utility for peeking around corners, since it allows you to charge up the weapon before you actually go around the edge, giving you a bit more time before opponents can react to you. So anytime you're rounding a corner, keep it in mind as it gives you a nice way to move on to the opponent and immediately have paint around that edge. One really odd thing you can do with Zipcaster that's very rarely going to be practical is the fact that you can actually jump after you stick your arm onto something, but before you actually move. If you happen to not jump or squid form off the wall for some reason, you use your arm and someone jumps you, then yeah, actually use your jump to try to avoid them. Finally is the infamous Booyah Bomb tech. Right after Booyah Bomb is thrown, there's a few frames where the extra HP it has isn't active, but the damage multipliers against Booyah is. And since Stamper has high damage multipliers against it, this means your charge slash basically becomes a one-shot if it hits at the right time. Even if you don't have time to fully charge it, your horizontal slash does exactly 98 damage, which will kill him even if it's slightly weak. Yes, this is why Decav, which does 40 damage, can Booyah tech with horizontal. And yes, Object Shredder does stack with this. This is like the one case that you might want to consider Object Shredder for this weapon, but realistically you have charge slash, so not really. Alright, let's wrap it up with the gear. Here are the absolute necessities. You want to be running comeback almost every time. There are a few cases on zones where you want last-ditch effort for Nouveau sword to play for a bit more paint, but 9 times out of 10, this is the buff you want. It gives you a bit more swim speed, and most importantly, ink efficiencies, that especially for the vanilla kit allow you to fight a lot better and use more of your burst bomb. Stealth is another one. You're a frontline weapon, you're gonna go in, you're gonna die sometimes, especially if you're playing with the Tacticooler, so it's important to get back into the action safely. One sub of special power-up is actually a utility sub for this weapon. It saves quite a bit of ink consumption on the arm for Zipcaster, which helps a lot with its duration as a whole. In addition to that, 2 subs of Ink Saver main give you an extra charge slash. For that little of an investment, it's 100% worth it on a weapon this ink hungry. Then finally, there's the 4 utility subs. I already talked about these mostly in my Brella guide, so I'll speed through them. Ink resistance gives you a little bit better mobility in enemy ink and reduces the damage you take. Quick super jump allows you to jump in and out a little bit faster, saving a massive amount of frames compared to not any of it. Special Saver is a bit more worth it for this than it is on even other weapons, since if you die mid-Zipcaster, it can still help you with saving some of the special there, and 1 sub of bomb defense can help you for a few matchups, mainly against stuff like Bucket or other burst bomb weapons. The last piece of gear I would consider a near necessity is swim speed up. It helps a lot to be able to chase opponents down and move around if you have a little bit of it, and given that your weapon either has a bit of M-lag or startup, mobility is very useful. Other abilities that I would personally consider would be charge up for the Nouveau sword, quick respawn builds if you're playing Stamper in other modes like Rainmaker for instance, and sub power up. About 2 subs of it helps your burst combos reach about the same length as your charge slash at a distance. And that's everything I have about Splatana Stamper. I hope this guide helped you pick up either of the weapons, and we'll see what I cover next time. I hope you guys have been enjoying the guide series, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you for watching.